In this latest episode, we are announcing our inaugural recipient of the Produce Moms Trailblazer Award. Our recipient is the CEO and owner of Frey Farms, which she founded at the age of 16. Drum roll, please. Welcome to the Produce Moms. This is the podcast where I talk to various people who've made an impact on the fruit and vegetable community. There are so many stories to share that will change the way you look at fresh produce. We are celebrating a kickoff of a new accolade that we have launched at the Produce Moms, our Trailblazer Award. And it just brings me so much joy to announce that Sarah Frey is our inaugural recipient of the Produce Moms Trailblazer Award. And with that, Sarah Frey, CEO, founder of Frey Farms, absolute all-around amazing human being. Welcome to the Produce Moms podcast.
Lori, thank you so much. And big thanks to your team. I'm so humbled by being the first recipient of your award, the Trailblazer Award, because I feel like you're the real trailblazer in this industry. And I just want to thank you for everything that you do for us, for the farmers, for the retailers, for the distributors of fresh produce. So many people really depend on ultimately what you do through education on your program and your direct-to-consumer outreach. And I don't think it's said enough how important that education and the component that you provide to consumers, how incredibly important it is to all of our businesses. So, even though I'm really humbled by receiving this award, if there was ever a trailblazer, it's you, sister.
Well, thank you. You are so kind. And, I must tell you and everyone who's with us today, we've been thinking about this for a long time. When the Produce Moms was owned by my former employer, before I, had that entrepreneurial moment and took it on my own, they had annual awards that they handed out, and it was always the Partner of the Year award. And we handed it out to someone who we were doing an exceptional level of work with. It was, and it was something where I always thought we need to bring back some sort of an award or an accolade. We are now at the point where through this platform, our podcast platform, we have connected, we have put that spotlight on over 300 amazing people who have literally just changed the landscape of the food and beverage industry and the way that households around the world are able to bring not just fresh produce, but all sorts of fresh food, all perimeter products, even natural products. We've had a great representation of the natural products industry. I really feel like the qualifying factors for being on the Produce Moms podcast are, you got to have whatever the product line is that you and your work represents. It must have the integrity of fruits and vegetables. It must come back to our core mission of getting more fruits and vegetables on every table. And most importantly, doing work that matters the most is kind of what the ethos was when we launched this show in 2018. And it really is, it still is so true today. And so we use that as like, okay, so at this point, we've met with over 300 people, shared these amazing stories with our community here on the podcast. And I thought to myself, what is the common thread? All these 300 people with diverse backgrounds, serving different stages of the supply chain, upstream, downstream, everywhere in between. What is the common thread? And it really is trailblazing. And when I, in my mind, like that is what moves my soul. So for you to say that you view the Produce Moms and the work I do as a trailblazer, that means so much to me. We named the award Trailblazer because that is what I view as my guiding light. And when I think of the people who have inspired me the most by doing work that matters the most, Sarah Frey, you are at the top of that list. So it is amazing to have you here. And I think that the world has been able to fall in love with you upon the publication of your book a couple years ago, The Growing Season. What a beautiful memoir that was. And I hope we have plenty of time today in the episode to talk about it. But before we dive into the memoir and the book and everything that came from that, let's talk first just about your background. Help people understand. I mean, you took over the family farm at an age that, most people don't even have a driver's license yet. And you're running your family business and saving the family farm. So tell us a little bit more about your background and how trailblazing started for you.
I would say that, just to be fair, it was never my intention to stay on the farm. Everything that I did during my entire childhood was meant to get me one step closer to getting off the farm, whether it was working hard, trying to get good grades in school, attending college and high school simultaneously, all of those things. I took that on, not because I had a desire to stay on the farm and turn it into, a successful farm. It was so that I could get the heck off of the farm. And ultimately, and I outlined sort of this moment in the book, The Growing Season, where I have this sort of epiphany, and I'm the last kid left on the farm. My four older brothers are all off living their own lives. They're either in college or they've started a career of some kind. But I realize in this sort of, very surreal moment that if I left, the five of us, my brothers and I, if I left too, we wouldn't have anything to come home to. So really it was, not necessarily the roots in the land that held me on the family farm. It was the roots of the family. And ultimately, I made a very split decision after years and years and years of, dreaming and planning my escape from this really rural area. It all changed in just that, one single moment. And I knew in that moment my future would look very different than everything that I had ever envisioned for myself up until that point.
When you were taking that leap at, what was it, Sarah, 15, 16 years old, when you were like, okay, I'll take over this farm?
Yeah, I was driving probably likely illegally, when I was 15 with a truck and selling melons. So I like to tell people I started when I was 16, but there might have been some of that ahead of when I actually got the driver's license. But, I was a kid, and when you think about a kid that age, now granted, and I, sort of lay the groundwork in the book, The Growing Season, because much of The Growing Season is about, my growing seasons as a little girl, and, a lot of the experiences, good and bad, that ultimately shaped me and prepared me for that moment when I did ultimately say, yep, I'm staying and I'm going to do this. And I also, in my mind, realized that getting ahead in life could still mean that you can stay behind, and fight and build. And for me, I was already, that entrepreneurial spirit was alive and well and already being nourished by the time I made the decision to stay on the farm, because I made that decision when I was about 17 years old. And that's when I had sort of the epiphany that I was going to stay. But everything I had been working and building my fresh produce delivery route and working with small retailers, and then
selling them. We gotta call it out. Selling them the melons from the Wabash River Valley.
Yes, exactly. Selling melons from the Indiana Wabash River Valley, cantaloupes, watermelons, really selling anything I could get my hands on and fit in the back of the bed of a hot pickup truck. So, and a lot of the time, I think back now when I was a kid, I was, I look like a carnival act driving down the road in, a pickup truck with cattle racks in the back full of melons, and a rickety pickup truck at that. But I had been saving my money, going to college, going to high school at the same time, saving every dollar that I made from that delivery route, sleeping in my truck because, well, number one, I wasn't really old enough to get a hotel when I needed one. And number two, I was too cheap to spend the $65, that it took to actually sleep in a bed.
Yeah, get a roadside motel room.
Yep. So, because I knew that was $65 at the time, my business was so seasonal, and I knew that $65 ultimately, yeah, I had it in my pocket in July, but it wasn't going to be that easy to make that in January in Illinois when the snow was flying. So it was like, no, save. So that whole sort of mentality, of saving and building, that all stayed the same, but the decision to stay on the farm and actually continue to grow and develop the business that I had started, that literally happened in that one sort of moment right here on the hill, on the land where I grew up on this farm. It was the golden hour. Ultimately, I remember I was selling off a lot of the assets for my parents that were left on the farm. And not that there were a lot of assets, but when I say assets, I mean, like, I was walking the last horse off of the farm the evening that, I had that moment of intervention in my life. And ultimately, I remember looking at the horse, and the horse was staring back at me, and I was looking out over all of this land. And, you've been here, Laura, it was the golden hour, and we have some of the most incredible sunsets here on the hill. And, the whole farm turned golden, and everything as far as my eyes could see, it just was so beautiful and so moving. And it was funny because it was like the first time I had ever really seen that sunset in that way. I had grown up here my whole entire life for 17 years. I never appreciated that sunset until that moment. And, I look at the horse looks at me, and I'm like, okay, well, my plans changed, but you're still going down the road. So get in the horse trailer. But, as an entrepreneur, you took an incredible risk when you bought the produce mall. And people, it's easy to sort of look at someone when they've reached certain milestones and success in their career and think, wow, well, they really did it. But what a lot of people don't see is what happens behind the scenes, and the struggle that we go through as entrepreneurs when we have an idea or we have a product that we're really passionate about and we're trying to bring it to life.
Even for me, Sarah, it was like just figuring out how to get yourself in the room.
Yeah.
Being very creative with limited resources. You're telling these stories of sleeping in your truck, and it's taken me back to the early days of TPM, when I was the owner. So we're talking like 2015, right after I'd acquired my idea and work for hire to own it myself. And I didn't sleep in a pickup truck, but I remember going to these events and, bartering so that I could get a credential into going to the event. Like, oh, we'll do a blog to promote this trade event, or whatever I had to do to get a press pass. And then not being able to afford a hotel room. So I would get on Airbnb and literally do like a shared bedroom rental, like something that no one traveling to our produce industry events understands that, except for maybe fellow entrepreneurs in the room. And then only booking Airbnbs where snacks were provided because like I couldn't afford a meal. So I needed to eat off granola bars and complimentary coffee while I was there. So
those are real things that we factor in. And
yes.
What? That is a common, I don't care if you're in the industry, the fresh produce industry, if you're the farmer, or if you are doing more of building sort of a media type company like you're building, or if you're in, it doesn't matter what you're trying to build. All entrepreneurs have one thing in common, and that's exactly what you just outlined. What we have to do is figure out how to do more with less every single day. How do I do more with less? Because we don't start out with all of the resources. And quite frankly, Lori, I think it's what makes our businesses better for it, because our brains are always programmed that way. When you start out that way and you have to really hone in on that type of thinking, and you're asking yourself every 5 minutes, well, how do I do more? And then the with less comes in, and then you figure that out. Hence the buses that we talked about and that you got to see when you visited the farm. In my world, when we were building this business, like, I had no money. I had, taken out a loan to buy our farm from the bank. And, I had enough money where I had bought my first truck and was selling these melons and felt like I was growing the business, but I didn't have enough money to go out and buy $250,000 fancy big, tractors and wagons and everything that it would, normally you would think it would take to harvest the types of crops that I was beginning to grow. And so I had to figure out, all right, well, how do I do more with less? And so how do I harvest these melons? I can't afford to go buy the equipment. So we found $2,500 buses, cut the sides out of them, and then ultimately converted them into both the tractor and the wagon. So now you're not buying the two pieces of equipment. It's all wrapped up into one for $2,500. You have an entire unit. And the kicker is, it actually turns out to be the most effective mode to actually harvest and the fruit from the field, and then also to deliver it into the packing facility. And the speed and the efficiency is so much better than had I went out and bought, a $150,000 tractor here or $250,000 rig here or there or whatever. So it actually ended up making us better. And we still use those $2,500 buses today. And now we just have hundreds of them, but it's still the most efficient way to harvest our crops. So by having to think that way, when you're starting out and you're a scrappy entrepreneur, you actually find efficiencies that if you did not have those challenges, you would never be aware of the ways that you could make your business run better, run faster. And ultimately, I think that's why, companies like Frey that started out very scrappy, you don't shake that mentality. One of the challenges that we have now within our company is how do you pass that on, that thinking on to the next generation, and as moms, you're a mom, I'm a mom, we are programmed to ultimately want to make our kids' life better, easier, better. We want to take care of things for them. So probably one of the biggest challenges, and I don't know if this is, I'm probably sure you struggle with the same thing because you want to go and you want to take care of it. But I know for me, being a mom, the hardest thing I've ever had to do is not make my children's life easy, because I learned that lesson and the value in that struggle and how that made me have to think creatively and ultimately challenge myself and be better off for it. So as a mom, restraint isn't exactly one of my virtues, but I've had to show a lot of restraint in raising Will and Luke, because there are so many times when things come up in their lives where I just want to go take care of it, but I have to just sit back and, like, just grit my teeth and refrain from helping them.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got with parenting, and it's like, I hate parenting advice because every household's different. Every child has different needs. So, but I do think that this is a good one. And after I share it, we're going to take a quick break. But something that was said to me, and I think I actually heard it at a produce industry event, one of those women breakfasts for the former PMA Women's Fresh Perspectives Breakfast. And, that event still lives on. You actually have been recognized as a female leader within our industry, the annual award you've received. But one year at that breakfast, the guest speaker said, "We must let our children fail." That's something we must let our children do. And
hardest thing you'll ever have to do as a mom.
Yes, 100%.
But
100%. But then when we put our entrepreneur hats on, we're like, oh, failure is, it teaches the lessons. It's the process improvement. There's jokes, there's memes, there's adages out there about how failure is glorified within the world of entrepreneurship. But then when we dial it down into our households, especially with our children, whoa, that is tough.
It's very tough. It's very tough. William, the oldest, ultimately, he is a senior in high school. And the kid, I got to tell you, 6:20 every morning, he's out the door. He goes to the CEO program, where there were a few students from different schools in the region were selected to participate in it. And every morning before their high school starts, they meet at a different town, and they meet in a boardroom, and they visit other businesses. They learn about other businesses, and then they strategize on how to continue to develop their program, get funding for their program, and expand their program. Well, he was so excited to have been selected to be in CEO. And I was, Will was the son that, the first 3 years of high school, Luke, his younger brother, was always the first one up, and it was always, Will, get up, we got to go. Will, get up, we got to go. This is the first year that I've never heard Luke have to tell his brother, wake up, we got to go, get ready, because he's out the door for that. But his mission in that program, the first thing that he ultimately was tasked with doing and took on was fundraising for an event that they were going to host. And he pitched his idea of what he felt like it should be. And it was selected. And the event was called A Night in Vegas. And so he's holding it in this little town on Thanksgiving weekend. And ultimately, it's an opportunity for people to come together in Mount Vernon, Illinois, and play cards and gamble. But gamble for prizes, that are donated, and raise money for a really great cause for, investing in, expanding the CEO program and making it even better for, the next class and the class after. So he comes home and he tells me how, he's so excited. He had the great idea. His idea got picked, and he already has it all figured out and what he's going to do. And he's hired this company at this point from St. Louis, Missouri. The company that I think they run and own the riverboats. And so he is 17 years old, 18 now, has went out and hired professional dealers and the professional tables, to bring into this event. And he's going all out with entertainment, professional dealer. I mean, he's really making this like a real night in Vegas. And I'm like, okay, all right, And I said, son, how much are those tables going to cost? And he said, well, it's just only going to be about $22,000. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, how many tickets do you have to? Well, we're getting sponsorships. And I thought you'd be a sponsor, Mom. Well, you're going to sponsor it, right? And I said, no, I never said I would sponsor that. What? You're going to crush my dreams? And I said, no, I'm not going to crush your dreams, but you've had this plan and you can't count on your mom to be your sponsor. You have to go out and figure out this on your own, because I'm not telling you that I won't buy tickets or support you if you need contacts or whatever you need, but I'm not just going to write a check and sponsor you for this event. And I bet he didn't sleep at all that night. But he got up the next morning, went to his program, went to school, and after school had 3 meetings that he set up on his own. And they had already raised $15,000 to go toward the event. Now, it could have been really, I could have been like, oh, yeah, son, I'm so happy that your idea got picked. And I'm so proud of you. Here's your check. And this is what, but what would he have learned from that, And so anyway, I've just been so incredibly proud of him and watching him work this. But that was one of those things where, I wanted to step in. I was so proud of my son and the work and the effort that he had put into the CEO program. But then ultimately, when it came down to it, I felt myself wanting to lean in and really be a part of it and take care of it for him. And I had to say, no, I can't.
It's a beautiful story and I was like, for anyone watching us on YouTube, like you might've seen my facial expressions. I'm like sitting here, like hiding my smile, because as you're talking about Will putting together this big thing, I'm thinking to myself, Sarah, have you even read your own book? Like, this is you. This is what you were doing as a teenager, the larger than life, like outlandish, and then figuring it out. I love it. So we're going to take a brief break and we're coming back with Sarah Frey. Happy holidays, everyone. I want to invite you to theproducemoms.com to check out our annual gift guide. We recently published our 2022 gift guide. Within this gift guide, there are 22 amazing gift ideas. These are ways to gift the gift of fruits and veggies, the gift of sustainability, wonderful inspiration for DIY gifts that won't break the bank. And speaking of budget, several of these companies have offered us exclusive discount codes. So make sure that you visit theproducemoms.com to check out our 2022 holiday gift guide. All right, welcome back to the Produce Moms podcast. Lori Taylor here with Sarah Frey. It is a blockbuster type of an episode because we are getting the raw, real, the one and only Sarah Frey, unscripted, unedited. I was just talking to Sarah in our commercial break. Our producer, Kristen, she prepares these beautiful run of show, and I'm supposed to follow it as the host. And you know what? We're totally just going rogue here.
Lori, every time you and I get together, we kind of do our own thing anyway. We're like, oh yeah, trailblazer. Yeah, we're trailblazers. All right, let's
Trailblazers do not necessarily follow the script or the way. All right, Sarah. So, we have talked throughout this episode about the book and all the challenges that you've had. And, one of my favorite parts of the book was when you walked into that Walmart distribution center and you said to them, like, hey, I'm delivering in my truck to all these stores. And oh my goodness, the relationship and how that moment, that courage, how that has been, it's just grown into so much. If you visit theproducemoms.com, folks, the blog that we composed that to celebrate Sarah as our inaugural Trailblazer Award, we've actually embedded remarks from Doug McMillon himself into that blog, talking about Sarah's importance as it relates to sourcing products from woman-owned businesses. And beyond that, Sarah, I know that you've been absolutely instrumental in the locally sourced programs at Walmart. And you've got a really unique place in when we think about USA grown food, US, domestic agriculture, the Midwest. I mean, I'm a Midwest girl. You're a Midwest girl. Not necessarily the area that folks think about when it comes to fruits and vegetables. So how did you make it happen? Like, tell us a little bit more about that growth with Walmart, the actual programming that you are a real catalyst for building there. And of course there's challenges. So just share more about it.
First of all, you'd mentioned Doug McMillon, and I got to say, so like I'm a total fan of Doug McMillon and his leadership. And
yeah,
I just remember during the early days of COVID, when in our industry we were watching everything just shut down around us, and we're all working to hang on and try to figure out, how we're going to move forward in our businesses, and what the next few weeks or what the next few years would be like in our businesses. And I remember very distinctly, I was having conversations on our Florida crop was in the ground, nearly ready for harvest at about that time. And I remember having conversations with our retail partners about, if we were going to be able to move that. This was at a time when people were literally sanitizing the boxes that their Amazon packages came in, and I just remember having Walmart was able to pivot very quickly. We were able to still have very good relations with our buyers, even though we were all at this sort of weird work from home, situation, and things were really sort of scary and uncertain. But you never really got that sense from the people in the company. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, everyone's handling this, in a really calm way and in a very effective way. And as I was making a lot of decisions for our own company that were, impactful and scary at times, I saw Doug McMillon on TV, and he had been to the White House.
Are you talking about the Rose Garden speech where all the retailers were there?
Doug McMillon spoke.
Yes, I watched it too. And he's like, "Hi, my name's Doug. I'm a Walmart associate."
That is the leadership. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, so if anyone ever thought that leadership at the top doesn't really matter at other levels, like that ultimately was such a clear picture to me as to how incredibly important steady, calm, humble leadership is. And when I heard him speak, number one, I thought, well, there you go. That's culturally, that's why nobody at Walmart is freaking out right now. And we're all working through this together, and we're making a plan for the supply, and we're working through, whether there's going to be a demand for the product or whether there isn't going to be a demand. And it's sort of steady as she goes. And when I saw Doug that day, and I've known Doug, but when I saw him in that moment, when he gave that talk, I thought, yep, there it is. That's a leader. And those are the types, like the Doug McMillon leaders, like we need more of those. We need those in our country. We need this. Unfortunately, we don't really get that in government, but it would be really nice to see more of that type of leadership. We just went through, an election season, and, at some point, I think that, I think our country would benefit from that kind of strong, steady, and also humble type of leadership. And so I say all of that to say this, the relationship with Walmart ultimately has went on for decades. I started doing business with them literally when I was a child. I was a kid, and I was selling, fresh produce to their Division I stores. And when I started, when they opened the distribution center down here in Olney, Illinois, I went in there ultimately to try to make my life easier. Like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could just bring my produce here and not have to go to, 12 different stores in one day to deliver their produce? I wasn't thinking like big picture. I was thinking like, I want to make my life easier and make my life more efficient. I can be more efficient. But what I walked out of there with that day was an entirely different perspective because of the size and the scale and the nature of their business. When I said, I would like to bring my produce here to you, they said, fabulous. Do that and bring us more. And we need, 3 loads of cantaloupes and 5 loads of watermelons, or whatever the number was that she said. I said, oh yeah, per week when this place officially opens. Absolutely, I can do that. Yeah, this is great. It wasn't until I got into the parking lot where I realized, oh man, she was talking about semi loads.
You looked over at the dock doors and you're like, shit, this is not pickup truckloads.
Yeah. And I remember thinking to myself, the first thought was, I'm not licensed to drive one of those. I'm going to need to get a license. And then it was like, no. I was still kind of catching up to the moment. And then I was like, no. It's not going to be me driving those. I need those trucks, and I need drivers for those trucks. And I'm going to need a whole lot more fresh produce to sell. But here's the thing about Walmart. During that time, they had field office buyers in the distribution center. So if you think about where Walmart's DCs are, they're scattered out throughout the country, where they get where all of the, food gets brought into and then gets distributed out to their stores. There used to be fresh produce buyers in nearly every one of those distribution centers. So those buyers had relationships then, and were there sort of boots on the ground in different parts and pockets of the country to be able to interface with small growers. And I say this often because I really think Walmart doesn't get enough credit for local sourcing, because they were doing it before it was cool. Like right now it's cool, and we talk about food miles, and we talk about food waste and sustainability, and we get the report cards from our retail partners, and we measure our progress against a certain set of metrics to check these, boxes. They were doing all of these things 30 some years ago. They just weren't capturing the data. And when I started working with Laura, and then, a series of buyers after Laura, I realized they knew they needed a supply, right? So you could really never get, they knew that they couldn't get enough, that they were growing so fast, they needed everything they could get. And then they knew that they needed a diversity of supply. And they also knew that they wanted to take cost out of the system. Well, how better to take cost out of the system than to deal with, the farmer down the road that doesn't have all of the transportation costs during their particular growing seasons. So it was sort of my job starting out as one of their supplier partners to identify all of the different farms in the Midwest, from, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Michigan, Kentucky, just sort of everything, in the heart of the country, and give them that information, who's growing what during what certain, seasonal timeframes. And I enjoyed that part of my business. And it was actually easy for me, because I was doing business in all of these different, pockets in rural communities. So if you think about where the Frey Farms, where we really got started in fresh fruit and vegetable production, is in the Wabash River Valley. So the Wabash River Valley has a certain type of soil that's conducive to growing melons that are desert crops. So it's a very sandy type loam soil. And there are pockets, little fruit and vegetable pockets all over the Midwest that are perfect. They're like little gardens of Edens, basically, all over the Midwest, that grow fruits and vegetables. Like down in the Boot Hill of Missouri, for example, you can grow anything there, any fruit or vegetable. And there's been a cottage industry of farmers down in Kennett, Missouri, for generations, growing fruits and vegetables. So along my journey and in my partnership with Walmart, I was identifying sort of these growers along the way, and some of the growers, fell into sort of my wheelhouse in the with the commodities that we were supplying. So we would partner up with those growers depending on what their needs were, whether they needed help actually growing the crop, whether they needed funding to grow the crop. It was sort of, we were making sort of hybrid deals with a lot of the growers of our commodities. And then the growers of other commodities, whether it was peaches or peppers or tomatoes or whatever it was at the time, we would also help them get their crops and their commodities into Walmart, and then ultimately make that partnership visible to Walmart so that they could bring them in as a direct supplier. So it's not like people were, always just having to sell, okay, all right, well, here's Sarah, we're going to sell to her. She's going to sell. No, I mean, that was something in my business. I wanted that direct relationship with the retailer. So I knew that other people, if you had an orchard and you were growing peaches, you'd want that direct relationship as well. But there are thousands and thousands of acres and that are growing of fruits and vegetables in the Midwest. And most people don't really realize how big fruit and vegetable production actually is. Most of our operations are east of the Mississippi. So now Frey Farms, we farm in 7 different states because, everything is seasonal, and we want to lengthen our selling season. So we have to start in the South, and we start in Florida, then it goes up to Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Arkansas, Missouri. So we're farming in different states to lengthen the amount of time that we're able to provide product to our retail partners. And a lot of the volume, though, that we depend on, really the heart of our business, still comes out of the Midwest. So if you think about the big commodities for us, watermelons are a huge commodity. I mean, we're perhaps the largest in the nation for watermelon production and sales. And a big percentage, a big chunk of that production comes out of the Midwest because, I mean, think about it. It's and it's also sort of a summery type of fruit, which is why we actually decided when we started making the watermelon juice that we would need to put a plant in Indiana, in your home state, Lori, to make the watermelon juice, because it was, when we thought about the food miles and where do you make this, where it's the most, you had to do it here in the Midwest. So you could use the Missouri melons and you could use the Indiana melons, and you wouldn't ultimately have to add all of these food miles to the raw product before you turned it into juice. And ultimately, we ended up making a lot of our investments at Frey in the Midwest because ultimately the location was also fabulous because we were next day delivery to 2/3 of the population in the US. So think about how important that is for fresh fruit and vegetable growers in the Midwest. Like if you can grow a crop of something, whatever it is, you have a market advantage over Western growers. Well, number one, they, obviously they have a lot of challenges out there as well with water rights and such. But think about the market advantage you have purely from a transportation standpoint in getting your commodities to the big market. So yeah, that was probably one of the probably the most fulfilling things that I've done in my career was getting to know hundreds and hundreds of all of these small family farms and throughout the Midwest, and learning, more about their business and why they were growing or why they had the peach orchard, and the granddaddy had the peach orchard, and they'd been doing it for years, and then also helping them sort of professionalize their businesses in the way that we had to professionalize ours. Walmart wasn't going to just keep buying from me out of the back of a pickup truck. That was going to end for me someday. So I had to make those investments, and I had to, professionalize the company. And, my brothers came home and joined me in the business. And that's what we spent our youth doing, running, we weren't a second or a third generation.
You kind of inherited a mess. Anyone who reads the book can identify with that. Sarah, you always teach me something new every time we talk. I had no idea when, I of course always have known you were a trailblazer, always have known that you're a change agent and a leader, had no idea that you had this almost like conduit or consultancy role that was elevating other local small scale farms to grow and position their farms to be able to do business with Walmart and scale the way that you have. That is amazing. We're going to take our last break. When we come back, folks, we're going to wrap things up a little bit more, have a little bit more fun with Sarah. This is a phenomenal episode celebrating Sarah Frey, Trailblazer of the Year, all around amazing human being. So Sarah, we'll be right back. I love grocery shopping. You all know that. And there's nothing that brings a smile to my face like when I actually see a Produce Moms branded fruit or vegetable on the grocery store shelf. So today I want to remind you all that we actually have an Idaho potato line that's available at select Walmart stores nationwide. So look for the Produce Moms branded Easy Baker potatoes. They are individually wrapped, triple washed, ready to cook Idaho potatoes grown by our amazing brand partners at Wada Farms. Make sure that you look for them. You are going to love them. We have so many ideas, recipes, inspirations, even a field trip to the farm that's available on our website. All you have to do is scan the little QR code that's on your Produce Moms Easy Baker to experience it all. Thank you so much, and eat more potatoes. Sarah, before the break, we were talking about the incredible role that you've had, building your farm, doing this catalyst work for other small farms and helping everyone level up and rise and scale the way that Frey Farms has. Anytime we talk to an entrepreneur on the podcast, it's always really cool to ask the founder to share more about the challenges that they face, whether it's been in your, along the way in your journey or what you're facing today. There's so much to be learned when we speak honestly and openly about our challenges. I also find in my journey that when I'm facing a challenge, if I have the guts to actually articulate that, I'm usually in a position where once you make your challenges known, the pieces start falling into place, with you being able to solve them. So I'd love, if you're comfortable with it, share a little bit more with our audience about challenges that you face, because to the point you made previously, most people who know you, Sarah Frey, they look at you and think, that girl, she's everything. She's gold. She's got it. She doesn't have a problem. There's no challenges that she's facing today.
I got 99 problems. I promise you that. Yeah. And that, I think we live in a world too, it would be really tough to be a teenager living in today's world where everything on social media is like so perfect and less than perfect. But, Lori, think about what you've done in your business. And I just want to say thank you again for the contribution that you make to our industry. And your work really does impact the lives of so many people across so many different channels in our industry. And I think that, when that surround sound is happening and it's making a difference, it's sort of easy not to recognize where that's coming from. And I think it's important to point out how, once again, how critical your role is in our industry, because we sort of get the halo effect of the work that Lori's out there doing. You're driving sort of innovation as well in our industry, because you're educating consumers, and consumers are starting to do new things and adopt new habits because of the work that you're doing. And we get to be the beneficiary of that, because we ultimately are dealing with a more educated consumer because of your work. And then we're also finding out, we're getting more in tune with what she wants, and we're able to tailor our business and our product offerings to, the consumer in a much more effective way. So I like to start with that. And then, I'll just end with the challenges, and in I'm in agriculture and you're in agriculture. There are so many things that are completely out of our control in this industry. When you think about the life of a farmer, and how they have to stay optimistic even in the darkest times, it's really quite incredible. And I gave this a lot of thought recently when I was reflecting on the life of a farmer and what keeps them getting out of bed every single day and going out and doing this incredibly difficult job that no one really fully appreciates, understands, or cares about until, there's a global pandemic and there's no food on the shelves, right? Then people are all like, oh, okay, wait, I can't get my favorite brand of this. I can't get that, then there, it seems to be more of an emphasis, like when it's gone, you miss it. But for the most part, farmers really do their work quietly and they struggle quietly, and they are very persistent people, and they get up every single day without accolades or appreciation and do the hardest work that you can possibly do in the country. And in dealing with, acts of God, watching crops get completely decimated through no fault of their own. And sometimes that can happen, and, it can be man-made, or it could be, just a particular weather event. And sometimes it can be a combination of both. And there are these things that are completely out of the farmer's control, and variables that, are just for most people, unless you're conditioned to really think like a farmer and have the hope of a farmer and the persistence of a farmer, most people really wouldn't be able to make it. And when you think about, the average income of a farmer is like $40-some thousand a year, and their debt, I recently read a statistic, is in the, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And we've lost so many small family farms, and farmers actually have the highest suicide rate for like the segment of the population. They account for, was it like less than 2%, I believe, of the entire population, and yet they, have the highest suicide rate. And I think so much of that is because of, sort of the intensity and the risk involved in doing what we do. So, we all have to put on this, like, yep, everything is going to be great. And if you're a farmer, especially, I mean, you can watch your entire crop get completely obliterated, destroyed. You can watch everything that you've built crumble around you through no fault of your own. And you still have to put a smile on and say, yeah, well, there's always next year. There's always next year. And I think that's what a lot of people don't see, that happens on a near daily basis in my life and the life of my brothers, of my family. I mean, I talked about social media and how, everything looks wonderful and stuff, but it's not real life, and it's not real agriculture. It's not the real challenges that we face. So, and I think there are a lot of people in our industry too, given the nature of our business, the time sensitivity, of the products that we sell in the fresh produce industry. That it's a high stress business, but ultimately we get up every day and we put a smile on our face and we put one foot in front of the other, and to say we're going to figure it out. But yeah, it can be incredibly tough. It's a tough business.
Thank you for sharing that. Beautifully stated. Some heavy stuff, and something else when I think about farming. And I've never farmed a day in my life, as have the pleasure of knowing a lot of amazing farmers. And
technically, you're a farmer. You're in this business.
And I've been out in the fields, met literally thousands of amazing people who represent and who are farmers themselves, or work day in and day out to represent farmers. And certainly that's how we view ourselves at the Produce Moms, a downstream advocate for farmers. But in light of those challenges, Sarah, something else that I think of when I think of agriculture, we have this industry that's so powerful, that's so big, that when we think about the fact that we're raising food and the end result is food, there's a level of recession resistance, or maybe it's just recession resiliency. I'm not sure. I've heard both terms that have been shared with me. But in addition to being a business, it's also a service to mankind. It's an equalizer among all people. When you think about the cultural side of what farmers empower us all with, and here we are connecting during the holiday season when so many of our listeners are going to be gathering around with people they love, celebrating one of the most beautiful times of the year. And what do? They come together and they have a meal together. Like, that to me is such a beautiful part of what agriculture is the cultural side of food, and the way it, in divisive times, we can agree on food. That's something that, it's a beautiful thing. So it's wonderful to hear from you. What some of these challenges are that you're facing, that the industry's facing. I just had to use that opportunity too to chime in with some of the things that move my soul and keep me motivated as someone who is a complement, running a business that's very complementary to farming. But it's the most important industry in the world. There is nothing more important than what we're doing day in and day out in agriculture.
And I think it's worth noting too that we are really going to have to, as a country, recognize and get serious about it. It's one thing to say, we're buying local, support your local farm, do this, that, whatever makes you feel. Everyone, I think consumers, and this is where we could also use your help, Lori. Consumers need to recognize that we're going to have to put some teeth in that. If we're going to save small, mid-sized family farm operations in this country, that there's going to have to be there are going to have to be some changes, and it can changes also in consumer behaviors and consumer demands. And I'm going to tell you where I'm headed with this, and we can end on this note. This statistic, but I would bet you that 98% of the population, U.S. population, does not know this statistic. But that is over 50% of our fresh produce that we consume is imported from other countries to this day. Now, we don't have time for a history lesson, and I can take you all the way back in time where we talk about, the trade agreements and terrible deals that our government did at the expense of American farmers. But we don't have time for that. But what we do need now, I need you to help remind consumers that over 50% of the fresh produce that we consume is imported into this country. And Lori, listen, I'm good with importing fresh fruits and vegetables during seasonal timeframes when you couldn't grow it here if you wanted to. I understand that. I get that. But there is absolutely we have been through this, and if we have not learned the lessons on where and how important, manufacturing our pharmaceuticals is to the health and well-being of our nation, I'm hoping that we've learned that lesson. I'm not sure that we did, but we also need to learn the lesson that our food supply needs to be grounded and centered in the United States. We need to have more control over what we're producing and what consumers are getting access to. And we have to make some real changes. Otherwise, that number is going to continue to decrease. And, for me, when I think about sort of big picture, it's hard to sort of get out of my own bubble where I'm looking at struggling farms or farms that might be going out of business for whatever reason. It's hard to get out of that bubble and think about, big picture. But we need to make sure that, and I'm hopeful that IFPA, now that PMA and United are one, I'm hopeful that this is an area of focus on them, because our food security is national security, in my opinion.
That's a common theme here on this show, Sarah. There's been several guests who have said it. I've said it several times. Food security is national security. That's not a Sarah Frey opinion, folks. That is the reality.
Yes. And we have to help inform policy, because there was a time when most Americans, we all have agrarian roots. Everybody, you, me, your neighbor that lives next door to you, we all have agrarian roots. There was a time in our country when people understood agriculture more, and agriculture has changed. The companies that control agriculture now operate on a global level. There are very few of them. Things in our industry look very different than they did even 20 years ago, 50 years ago, or 30, 40 years ago. And we need to sort of take a step back, and we need to analyze the industry as a whole, and then also start to formulate some key messages to influence, some more positive types of outcomes for our industry. And what I mean by that is we are going to need to educate and engage with consumers better and more effectively with our messaging to ultimately influence what gets done on a policy level, if that makes sense. So like I said, I would bet consumers, the American consumer, I would bet a small farm, 40 acres, that 90 some percent of the US population has no idea that over 50% of the fresh food that they eat, or of the fruits and vegetables that they eat, are imported. And that's sad to me. And that just tells me that, as an industry, we haven't really done a good job of an effective job yet of educating consumers. Because I would think that people would be worried about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have to empower our domestic farmers to maintain that, not just food security, but food sovereignty, and our ability to make sure our population's fed. So let's talk about let's talk about this in terms of like a real life application. All right. So using your watermelon farm and one of your farms in Florida as an example. So Florida is the first state that you farm in that comes into, ready for harvest in early spring, usually mid-spring. And the country that is finishing up, our winter melon, because when was the last time, folks, you walked into the grocery store and watermelon wasn't on shelf? It's available year round. And the only way that we can do that is to, we have to follow the sun, so you're either looking into the Southern Hemisphere, Central America, Mexico, what have you. So typically with watermelon, we'll use that as the example since we've got the one and only Sarah Frey here with us. So we're getting our watermelon from Mexico. Sarah's watermelons in Florida are ready to harvest and sell. And Publix in Florida, or any retailer.
This is hypothetical.
It's hypothetical. I'm painting a story. I have to call out. Everyone goes to Publix when they're in Florida. It's like one of the first places I stop when I go to the beach. I go to Publix before I go to the sand. All right. So, so the grocer, we don't have to call them out. So the grocer at their buying office, they get quotes from the farmers that have the watermelon that's available for them to purchase. What price point would the domestic, because we're paying domestic labor rates, they're going to be higher than what, the farms in Mexico are paying?
5 to 8 times higher.
Right. Because then if you're the retailer and all we care about is price or the short-term gain, who are you going to go with? And so is that a realistic example, Sarah?
So any retailer is going to look at that. Naturally, they're going to want to choose domestic product because they're going to know it's fresher, first of season. They're going to want that product in their stores, but ultimately it's going to come down to a bottom line number. And when you have overlapping seasons, there are going to be some major price gaps in between what's produced domestically and then what is imported. And fruit and vegetable farmers in the U.S. are held to standards, whether it's on labor, which I'm the first one to, I think those are good standards to be held to.
Yeah, Sarah's been in Congress talking about improving labor conditions on farms.
But that has to be applied across the board. So you can't have it's like having rules for thee and not for me, So you can't have wage rates that are instituted in the US and other countries competing that are not held to the same standards. I mean, it's no different than why our manufacturing jobs left every small town and in the heart of the country, right? This is the same thing. The same principle applies to what's happening to a lot of these farms. So, when you can't afford the government regulated wage rates to, say, use an H-2A worker, which is an agriculture worker on your farm because you're competing with your competition isn't held to the same standard and your growing costs are higher and your labor costs, which in the fresh fruit and vegetable industry is a major component of your overall cost. If you're at that disadvantage, you can't stay in, there's not a viable path for you. Because you can't start out with that competitive disadvantage in your season and ultimately sell your crop at you can't even break even at that price. So American farmers, and maybe it's just because there aren't a lot of us, I don't know. Farmers are such a small percentage of the population. And I sit here and I think, yeah, but we're feeding the world. Doesn't anybody care? Maybe it's because there are so few of us that no one really, dialed the lens in and put the microscope down on that to say, oh, okay. And, that's usually how problems sort of evolve over time. And then, you have one farm shuts down, then another farm shuts down, and then maybe a packing facility that's packing tomatoes and immokalee, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it shuts down. And then you have a big, vacant building in the middle of a rural town that used to be vibrant with the packing of fresh produce. But because, of the way that we conduct trade in this country, they quietly shut down operations. And then you wake up one day and you say, where did it all go? We're at that point, I guess, is my point in bringing up the fact that over half of our fruits and vegetables are imported. We've hit that mark. Okay. We're at that point where we're looking around, and now you can clearly see the impacts of what has transpired through, rules, regulations, laws, trade agreements, what has transpired over the past 30 years. And if we don't recognize that now and come to terms with it and start to try to turn the ship back around, and we're going to be looking at a number of 75%, 80% in 4 years from now. And then at what point is that, at what point does that even, cease to exist in our country? And that's why I think it's critical too. And I think we have to take a really good look at where we have diversity and geographic diversity in growing our fruits and vegetables. So you think about the production in California and what they constantly have struggled with. I don't feel like their environmental problems are going to get any easier to solve in California. So that's going to push more of the production either out of the country, out of the US, and a lot of it, frankly, a lot of the reason that we have such a high import number is that those farmers have already made investments in Mexico, and they're already doing a lot. They've shifted a lot of that production over the border. But then you have to look at the resources that you have in, land and growing regions. And this is where I think there's an opportunity really for these small farms in the Midwest. They might even be larger grain farms that have, 1,000, 2,000 acres, 3,000 acres, or even 5,000 acres of row crops, but, they have maybe 100 acres set aside for diversity in their business, where they're growing a specialty type crop. And there's a lot of that going on. But I think that we have to take a lot of things into consideration. And I tell you that we also have challenges with the uncertainty of the weather patterns now, and whether you believe climate change is real or not, or how much of it's man-made versus how much of it's natural. I'm not here to debate that, but I can tell you that growing seasons and have changed, and some are longer, some are hotter, some are shorter. Weather events, natural disasters seem to be happening more frequently, which, impact the amount of production that we have. So I think these are all things that we need to take into account. And it all ties back to ultimately food security is national security. We have to change course. We cannot continue to import over half of the fruits and vegetables that we eat. And we have to take a long, hard look at the resources that we have in our country and identify the places in America in which we can diversify and make investments into sustainable agriculture and grow more of the food that we need to support a growing population.
Sarah Frey, you bring tears to my eyes because your leadership's more important now as you explain this. But Girl, it has been an amazing episode. Thank you so much for being with us. We are so proud to honor you as our inaugural recipient of the Produce Moms Trailblazer Award. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We love you, and we look forward to celebrating your future success.
Thank you so much, Lori, for having me on. I love our time together, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Produce Moms podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and any preferred podcast platform. Check out the Produce Moms on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Special thanks to everyone involved with the Produce Moms podcast, my amazing team. Stay tuned till next time. The Produce Challenge is a tool that we've been publishing at the Produce Moms since 2013. This tool is an incredible, easy way for you to discover more varieties of fruits and vegetables in the produce department. It is a proven tool and strategy to get us all to eat more fruits and vegetables in both volume and variety. When we started the tool in 2013, the goal was to encourage everyone to go into the produce department and try them all. Find your favorite. Challenge to view this month's Produce Challenge. Remember, it's never too late to start. This tool helps you eat more fruits and vegetables, a different fruit or vegetable every day. It's also a great tool for seasonality, and you can count on us at the Produce Moms for all of the tips that you need on how to select, store, and serve each of the produce items of the day in the Produce Challenge through our social media channels. Hope to see you taking the Produce Challenge soon.